Hello, you're welcome. You're welcome onto my channel today, and it gives me great joy to observe you are viewing this video. I'm Professor Olayinka Akwale. I'm a lecturer in the university. On this channel, I do a number of studies, but all the studies I do, you can easily cluster them into four: sociology, research, relationship, and migration. Meanwhile, if you have not subscribed to this channel, kindly go ahead and click subscribe on your screen right now to join my family of subscribers, and so that you might be alerted every time I drop new content. The video today is on surplus value, capitalism and surplus value. Karl Marx and surplus value. And I believe this is a very important concept that is very relevant to us today, as it was relevant during the time of Karl Marx. Meanwhile, I have a video on Marxism as a theory. I have a video on Karl Marx as an individual, where I looked at Karl Marx, his biography, and also his major contributions. I have another video on the concept of mode of production. So this time I'm going to talk about surplus value as one of the major contributions of Karl Marx, and because it's very relevant to us today. And especially when you look at continuous, preponderance of capitalism. I also did a video, I dropped a video before this on poverty. And when you look at preponderance of poverty across the world, we can also trace some of these things to the issue of surplus value. So welcome to surplus value. Stay tuned to the end. And what is then surplus value? Surplus value simply means the excess value that workers create during the production processes in the capitalist mode of production. In the capitalist mode of production, there's productive activities, that go on, and workers, laborers are paid, supposedly based on their contribution to the production process. So excess values, talk about, the values, excess values, additional values that workers create, during production process in the capitalist, mode of production. And, usually we compare, values that workers create, we compare it with the salaries or wages they receive. We believe workers create values by putting in their labor during the production processes, and to now be able to say, okay, excess value, we now compare it with the wages and salaries that workers are paid. To what extent have they created value, and to what extent have they been paid values, salaries or wages compared to the values they create? Because labor is also a major, element in the means of production. Generally, theoretically, we also say, means of production. We compare it with factors of production in economics. But for capitalist mode of production, if you look at the theoretical proposition of Karl Marx, that of mode of production in capitalist society, factors of production will not be readily relevant, because factors of production will not take into account the exploitative tendencies, exploitations that go on in the production processes. So to be able to understand excess, surplus value, we look at it in essence, what goes into production, what comes out of it, and what do workers, receive. So and you can find relevance of surplus value across all sectors of the economy. Even today, you see in IT, you see in engineering, is this in manufacturing, or even simple trade. You can find it globally speaking. And when you look at the quality of life that workers live today, taking that with poverty, underemployment, disguised unemployment, working below a qualification or capacity, you will understand that surplus value is still very relevant today, depending on theoretical orientation or pragmatic orientation that you talk about. So it's not just a theoretical proposition. I believe it has practical relevance, and this is why I'm doing this. So generally, to step it down, you can look at surplus value as what we now know as profit. So at the very basic level, surplus value can be said to be profit, largely speaking. So when we talk about profit, from the perspective of capitalistic orientation as constructed, as theorized by Karl Marx, there is no such thing as profit for Marx. What we call profit is actually what Marx called surplus value. That is, workers work, the excess work that workers do that they are not paid for is what capitalists call profit. So for Marx, there's no such thing as profit. What we have is surplus value created through continuous exploitation of the lower class. So no such thing as profit if you put the boundary into surplus value. So a surplus value for Karl Marx is a consequence of exploitation. Workers, laborers are not paid what is due to them. That if the workers are paid what is due to them in production processes, then the construction concept of profit will simply disappear, because workers will then be paid according to their capacity, objectively and fairly. So what we call profit is an outcome of exploitative relations that go on in production processes. So for Marx, there's a need for equality, there's a need for fairness, there's a need to end oppression in capitalist society. And that's why Marx brought the issue of surplus value to the fore. That is, surplus value will create more reality in drawing attention to the level of human degradation, human exploitation in production processes. So when you now look at, in terms of simple calculation of surplus value for Marx, when you look at amount of effort, amount of labor that is put into production, you take that in relation to the amount realized in sales of the output, result of the production through labor. When you look at it, they have produced this camera I'm using for recording this video, for example, or the seat I'm on now. So it's been created. So you sell this seat for $100, for example, or my camera for $100, for example. That means you have taken into account the rent, the equipment, the labor, the manufacturing, processes, and all that goes to it, including labor. So that is why you are selling it $100. So, but in the real sense, you have only spent $70, including tax, in producing this. So normally you will say in contemporary times you have made profit of $30 after tax and all your cost of labor. So for Marx, that $30 is not profit. It's because you have underpaid certain individuals who have put their labor, who have sold their labor in the production processes. So if that $30 is surplus value, because additional values that were created by laborers or workers that you did not pay, that you have underpaid. So that $30, that means if you pay workers the real amount they deserve, that $30 will have gone into wages and salary. So if you pay the actual worth of the labor that they have put into the production processes, then that means you would not have seen $30. That's the simple breakdown of surplus value in the capitalist society from the perspective of Karl Marx. And so this surplus value gives us clear demonstration of exploitation. But you can now ask the question, if you want to ask the question like I would normally ask, then if you call this surplus value, so what would be the motivation for entrepreneurs? What would be the motivation for the brilliant ones who have invested in themselves to build human capital? If you view my video on poverty, where I talk about meanings of poverty, types of poverty, causes of poverty, perspectives in poverty, and poverty and development, view that video. There's a perspective that I talk about human capital theory, that people are also poor because they did not build their capacity individually. It is an individualistic perspective. They did not build their capacity to be able to compete and to create meanings and values in society. That's why they are poor. So if you come from the perspective of human capital theory or perspective, then you can say these workers are poor because they do not have competitive skill to sell, that they sell basic labor, like primary product. So you can also flip it in that manner that, well, surplus value cannot be right, that people have to be rewarded for creating value, for creating an environment to produce goods and services. So profit is still right. So you can't say everything is surplus value. So if you now say that $30 can be seen as surplus value and not profit, so why would the individual create that business environment, productive environment in capitalist society to be able to produce anything, goods and services, knowing fully whether capitalism is survival of the fittest, creation of value? So that's the way one can critique. So I'm bringing you in between to the criticism of surplus value. Do you get it now? However, the most important point I want to bring out of it is to bring perspective, a new nuance from the perspective of Marx through surplus value, for us to be able to look at a new way, that can build equality and fair compensation and wages, because wages and salaries are compensations for labor. So can we flip it through the perspective, since we know profit, can we flip this through the perspective of surplus value so that we can demand more equitable wages and salaries, compensation for workers who are selling their labor? So the workers create values, that's the true extraction of labors, and wages and salaries as a compensation for them. So profit as compensation, is what surplus value preaches. That is, wages and salary are compensation, and profit is a reflection of over exploitation of labor through underpayment. So exploitation, capital accumulation, rate of exploitation, and the need for equitable distribution of wealth through commensurate wages and salary is very important through this framework, through this concept of mode of production. So it's just simply to draw attention to the lack of justice, economic justice, lack of equality, lack of fairness, over exploitation or exploitation and oppression through capitalism. That's what surplus value intends to draw attention to. So you have your own perspective. You might agree that you agree with Marx that surplus value is actually a reflection, consequence of our exploitation. There should be more equitable distribution of wealth and resources in the productive economy and even in capitalism. And we can use this concept of surplus value to drive that argument. If you're also a capitalist and you believe, from my criticism earlier in between the video, that actually what would be the reward for manufacturers? What would be the reward for entrepreneurs? What would be the reward for those who bring together all the forces of production, relations of production, means of production, who bring them together to create value? What would be the motivation? How will we have competition in society? That's another perspective. If profits simply disappear because we want to create more value, because we want to pay more for the values of workers, so how do you sustain the system? So it's the nuance depending on the context and your theoretical leaning. So the argument is just a little argument, but it draws attention to a bigger issue within this narrative. Wow. Till I see you in my next video, kindly click subscribe, and bye for now.